Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. I want to start today with a big question, a very important question. How the fuck are your hamstrings? Are they okay? You reckon you could play this weekend? Do you know where your boots are? What? No, you left your boots in the cupboard underneath the stairs the last time you played. You put some newspaper in them and you forgot all about them, and now, God, that newspaper smell, remember that? Boot leather, well, it's not like boot leather anymore. It's sort of like the hide of a hippo covered in dried out swamp mud. Well, that's your own fault. You're going to have to get them on, and you're going to have to score some goals for Arsenal this weekend because, well, we need a centre forward. Because the last one we had is now, unfortunately, very injured. Very, very injured indeed. This was not the plan when we went to Dubai. Plan was go and get some sunshine, some vitamin D, maybe endure a night in that fucking sprinkly salt meat wankers restaurant giving you subpar ribeye for sky-high prices. That's the worst thing that was supposed to happen during this trip to Dubai. Instead, Kai Havertz picks up a hamstring scare, and the scare turns out to be like 13-year-old me watching The Exorcist and not sleeping for 2 nights. That's how fucked up that film got me. And that's kind of where we are with Kai Havertz's hamstrings. Perhaps not with the old projectile vomiting and the head swiveling around like a fucking owl, but still a scary situation because it leaves us in very, very short supply with strikers/forwards and gives Mikel Arteta a lot of thinking to do about how he sets up his team between now and the end of the season, and even this weekend when we go and take on Leicester. So there's a lot to talk about, so we might as well just get on with the show. And with me to do that, a man formerly of Football London, but who now has a new gig which doesn't require him to write 50 articles a day about Arsenal. It's a pleasure to welcome back Kaya Kaynak. Hi, Kaya.
Hey, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm good. How have you found the transition from like the heat of the Arsenal beat, if you like, to being sort of a more, I don't know if passive is the right word, but being able to sort of enjoy or indulge Arsenal in your own time for better or worse?
Yeah, it's certainly been different. I'd say that the heat is very much still felt. I'm sat up in the stands now with my dad, which I'm really enjoying being back there. But you very much you feel the heat up there, which is it's been hot the past few days and past few weeks actually since I started going back. So yeah, enjoying that, but also enjoying a sort of slightly slower pace of life. I've been talking to some sort of my colleagues who are still in the beat over the past month in January, as I was talking to you about just before we came on air, and I think there were 17 press conferences in total, and I sort of thought, you know what, with all that going on, it was maybe a good time to step back, and I don't know, I hope that I haven't brought the bad luck on the club since leaving, but it doesn't seem to be going that well at the minute.
Yeah, someone needs to take over the hot chocolate mantle from you see, that's all it is. We just need to get that sorted out and everything else will be all right. You know, speaking of bad luck, we might as well just get into this. We are going to do something a little bit different, maybe a little way down this conversation, but you know, Arsenal went to Dubai. I think the plan was obviously to do some training, to let the lads decompress, to relax after what has been a very hectic period with sort of 11 or is it 13 games in the first, 4 or 5 weeks of the season. So a lot going on. So the plan was go decompress, get some sunshine, get some rest, come back and turn the page and get ready to go on the rest of the season. But obviously something went wrong, and that is the Kai Havertz injury. Can I just ask you first, what was your gut reaction to it? Because mine, when I heard it, was like, oh, we're fucked now.
Yeah, very similar. I think I was in the if you don't laugh, you cry camp. So I think it was sort of a laughter that very quickly dissolved into tears. It was because we all knew that with Gabriel Jesus out for the rest of the season, with Bukayo Saka out for a long time, with Gabriel Martinelli out for a long time, Kai Havertz was basically going to have to play every minute as he has been doing all season. And then my brain quickly turned to the maths of, right, okay, Havertz is gone, who's left? And Trossard is Arsenal's only sort of, you can't even call him an orthodox centre-forward, but he's just someone who's played there before. Waneri, Arteta has said, is an option there. But to be honest, I think putting a 17-year-old up front against some of the big Premier League defenders is a big ask, and in the Champions League as well. And then you look at Raheem Sterling, who has not really set the world alight, to be kind, since he came from Chelsea. So yeah, my reaction was a slightly delayed holy fuck, but I got there eventually after sort of laughter and tears and sort of panic.
Yeah, there is obviously quite a lot to unpack and a fair amount of recrimination and finger pointing and blame and all of those things that we can get into. When it comes to the January window, maybe a little bit before that. I suppose the first thing to say, and I haven't really seen this anywhere, and it was only something that occurred to me after I wrote the blog this morning, which was about this situation and how we've got to where we are, is that this is obviously a big blow for Arsenal, but I think as well we have to acknowledge that this is going to be like a big blow for Kai Havertz personally, because I think he is a guy, we've come to know him since he arrived from Chelsea, that he's a very emotional guy. He's a guy who's really invested in the team. He's a guy who will give everything for the team. Arteta talked about that before the injury, about how he's a guy who will always do the running and he will, push himself to the limits for the team. We saw at the end of last season, the game against Everton, the final day of the season, when we didn't get the result we needed in the other game. And of course, Manchester City were the champions. The players who given a lot were obviously devastated, disappointed, but I think perhaps the guy who looked the most disappointed in all of that was Kai Havertz. He looked like he was going to cry at one point on the pitch, and listen, I don't blame him for that, but I think we have to maybe take a moment to think about this from his perspective, that a guy who is absolutely desperate to deliver for Arsenal and for this team and for this group of players is now sidelined with a major injury and won't be back until next season. So from a very personal, a human point of view, it's a real tough one for him.
Yeah, as a psychological profile, Kai Havertz is interesting for an elite athlete, because he's someone who doesn't seem to have that inbuilt self-confidence that most people at the very top of sport do. If you look at someone like Bukayo Saka, for example, he obviously missed the penalty with England in the Euros, and then despite having a few nerves about becoming Arsenal's regular penalty taker after that, has stepped up and kind of put it behind him since, and didn't seem to have too many issues with that. Whereas someone like a Havertz is sort of, he's been through setbacks in his career, but he seems to feel them quite keenly, as you were saying there. And I remember speaking to sort of people around the club when I was sort of covering it a bit more in depth, and they would say sort of, yeah, he's a really nice guy. He sort of asks how you are. He's quite rare in the sense that he sort of genuinely seems to care about what people think of him in a sort of a personal sense. So that's quite an interesting sort of thing, I think, to consider with him. And I think he in particular felt the love Arsenal gave him last season after he joined, with the Waka Waka chant, everyone, really getting behind him. And after a difficult time at Chelsea, where I think the fans were maybe not the best to him at the end of his time there, you'll be shocked to hear. And I think he felt that, and he felt the love he felt from Arsenal fans, and wanted to repay it. And maybe that's part of why he was in tears at the end of the season on the pitch, and why he was so invested, and why he's literally been, that Wolves game, we've all seen the footage of him quite literally collapsing at the end, because he is giving his everything for the team. And I think, to be honest, as much as that's something we love about him, it's probably been to his detriment in the long run. But yeah, I think a bit like Gabriel Jesus and a bit like Bukayo Saka, where Arsenal fans are really good at getting behind them, I'm sure that they'll be good at getting behind Kai Havertz. And Mikel Arteta has been very good at bringing injured players into the fold and keeping them feeling like they're part of the team. We saw this with Yuri and Timber last season. We've seen this with players who have had long-term injuries this season. So I'm sure that Arsenal will work hard to keep Kai Havertz feeling like he's on board, because he's a massive part of the plans going forward. And I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that he has a big role to play. Yeah,
I think the final point just to make on this before we go into the nuts and bolts of where we are is that Kai Havertz earned that love from the Arsenal fans, because there was obviously a fair amount of, how will I put it, skepticism about the signing when it went through and where exactly he was going to play. And I think he was, it's fair to say, signed to be a midfielder rather than a centre forward. But over the course of the season, he really grew into the team. He took on a different role. He contributed and he helped us in that second part of the season go on a really, really good run, which was just not quite good enough to get us to the title. But he earned that love, I think, and earned the commendations from Arsenal fans. So it is a real shame for him on a personal level. Widening it out, though, Kaya, the focus will be on the January window and Arsenal having the opportunity to bring somebody into the squad. As you said, Saka was sidelined already. Jesus picked up an ACL injury in mid-January. And from there, the messaging, I think, from Mikel Arteta changed quite considerably. I know you weren't in those press conferences, but I'm sure you've seen the quotes where he sort of said, went from going, yeah, maybe a signing, to, oh, we definitely need a signing. So what's your read on what didn't happen in the January window, and to what extent this was a risk from Arsenal banking on a very small group of players to get us through until the end of the season?
And it always felt like a big risk, I think, for Arsenal to bank on this small number of players. It was always going to be a thing where it felt like they were short already, even with the sixth, Sterling, Trossard, Martinelli, Havertz, Jesus, Saka and Waneri, and I feel like I've forgotten someone in there, of course, as well. But with that group, it was always it felt quite short. And I think we all know that Arsenal needed to add something to that already, even if everyone's fit. If you take away 2 of those 6, they definitely need to. And if you take away 3, arguably 4, then they definitely need to. And I think Arteta, as you said, he turned his tune a little bit. It went from, listen, if we get someone to we need someone, and that change was quite drastic and I think quite telling about the fact that he was trying to put pressure on the board, and he's not stupid when it comes to press conferences. He knows how they work. He knows that the board will be watching and listening, and it felt like Arsenal did try a bit. The Ollie Watkins bid was interesting, but it's frustrating because you see a deal like that and you think, to be honest, Villa are probably fair enough rejecting a £40 million bid for him. 60 million seems about what a player like Ollie Watkins is worth. So without sounding too sort of basic about it, why don't they spend the money? And the money's there. They could have done the deal. Always think about the long term is obviously important, but I think in this season, it's such a weird season where Man City are way off the pace. Liverpool are obviously ahead, but in my opinion, still haven't looked that great. I mean, I watched them last night against Everton and I thought they were lucky to come away with a point, and Everton were unlucky not to win that game. And there's been a lot of games like that with Liverpool this season. And I just think, if Arsenal wanted to win now, as a lot of the messaging from the club is, we've got to the stage in the project where we need to start winning trophies, then they kind of just need that one tiny extra push to get them over the line. And I honestly think a signing like Ollie Watkins would have done that. A forward of sorts would have done that. And I get what Arteta was saying about not just having a body and not just having someone in for the sake of it, but also I think bringing a body in would have really helped in this situation. And a lot of the reason why Arsenal, I think, have struggled in the end of games, so I think back to that Aston Villa game where they were 2-0 up and they got pegged back to 2-2, is because they haven't had the reserves from the bench to go again. Whereas Liverpool, who have barely had an injury apart from Diogo Jota all season, have had the reserves to change things up, to go again. And if you look at the goal they scored last night to go ahead against Everton, the assist was from Curtis Jones, who was a substitute. Arsenal haven't had that impact from substitutes because they haven't had many substitutes. So, it was always a risk, and I think it's massively backfired for Arsenal. And to be honest, they kind of have to kind of accept the criticism because it's justified. And I think everyone who is angry about the situation is quite right to be. Yeah,
of course. They have to own that. And I think it's, when people talk about it, they might say, well, this is Arteta not wanting to spend because he wants just the right player, or this is the board, or this is the owners not giving the money, or Jason Ado didn't do his job as the interim sporting director. I think it's a combination of all of those things. I'm not saying that those are the specific things, but I don't think you can pin it all on one person. This is why it didn't happen. I think there are myriad reasons, and maybe the situation Arsenal found themselves in is something worth investigating in terms of executive health, if you want to call it. If you want to call it that, I think what's fascinating is, like, if you were to put some of the names that were, in inverted commas, available, or some of the players who moved in January, particularly players who moved on loan in January, I think everyone will accept it's a more difficult market, but not an impossible market. But if you were to give people those names on the 1st of January, there'd have been a lot of like, I don't know about that guy. But then when it comes to the 3rd of February and the window's closed and we're without Havertz, we're without Martinelli, we're in a real pickle, those names become a lot more appealing, don't they?
Yeah, it's the nightclub analogy. Everyone looks good at 5 a.m. when the lights start to come up, you know? I think that's how you start feeling about things. I don't think Matthias Tell would have necessarily transformed Arsenal's season. I don't think Marcus Rashford would have done. I don't think Marco Asensio would have done. But listen, I'd take them all now. I'd take them all now as bodies, as quality options to come off the bench and to reinforce and to make a difference. So, yeah, there must have been a loan option out there that Arsenal could have considered. I know people have their doubts about Rashford, and there was a lot of question marks over Tell as well. Asensio felt like a decent-ish deal, and there's other players who moved around for relatively cheap in the month. And yeah, you look at those moves and you think, well, maybe they could have done something there, but yeah, they chose not to, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah. I wrote about this today on the blog. I really think a lot of what this January, or what has transpired in this January or not transpired in this January, stems back to last summer. And Arsenal were interested in a centre forward in Benjamin Sesko, but after that didn't really pursue any kind of attacking player. We brought in Calafiori, we brought in Mikel Merino. We had to wait for players to go out to bring those players in, and then right at the end, you know, we found ourselves in a situation where we had to do two, what you might label emergency loan deals, or certainly EOR adjacent loan deals, because we needed a goalkeeper in order to let Aaron Ramsdale go, and that meant bringing Neto in on loan, and we needed some kind of attacking player because we let Reiss Nelson go to Fulham. I think in hindsight, one of the things we should have done was just keep Reiss Nelson and not bring Raheem Sterling in. I know there were probably issues of minutes or what have you, but in terms of overall contribution and what it might have given us in January in terms of a little more leeway, maybe 2020 hindsight, of course, yeah. You keep Reiss Nelson and it gives you the scope to maybe do a Premier League loan in January. I just don't think you can buy your way out of a bad summer in January. For me, the January window ideally is to give yourself something a little bit extra if you need it at a key moment in the season. So whether you have a problem that you can try and fix in January, or if you have an opportunity to take you to a different level in January, that's what that window is for. But I think if you don't get the summer window right, it becomes really, really difficult to fix your problems in January without then impacting your upcoming summer, which I think is a big part of why Arsenal didn't do anything in the January window, because they need, I'm not saying keeping their powder dry, but I think if they could have done Watkins, they would have, but that obviously would have had an impact on signing a forward in the summer.
Yeah, it's I think you're right, and you certainly can't buy out of a bad summer well in January, so you can't get deals in January. So maybe you can find the right player, but it'll cost an extra 20, 30, 40 million more than he would in the summer. And yeah, I won't pretend that I wasn't sort of in favour of the Sterling deal at the time, because I sort of looked at it on paper and I thought, is Raheem Sterling better than Reiss Nelson? And I said that as someone who hadn't watched Raheem Sterling for a couple of years at Chelsea and hadn't realised how beyond the age curve I think he was. And now I see that was probably wrong, but to be honest, like, Reiss Nelson's been injured for however many weeks at Fulham too, so yeah, it seems like that bad luck has travelled even with Arsenal players who aren't still at the club. I do agree though, they let a lot of forward players go, so not just not just Nelson, but Smith Rowe was allowed to leave, and Nketiah was allowed to leave, Vieira was allowed to leave. You let that level of, all three of those players can play in various positions across the front line and in midfield. It's not just a body, it's the versatility. And listen, I get why you had to make space for Ethan Nwaneri. Emile Smith-Rowe deserved his minutes, and I think we were all happy to wish him well on his way. I don't think anyone was losing any sleep over Vieira going out on loan, and I think Eddie Nketiah has not set the world alight at Palace. And I think, to be honest, if Eddie Nketiah was the only striker Arsenal had right now, I'm sure a lot of Arsenal fans would be pretty, let's say, frantic anyway. So yeah. But having said all that, if you let that much talent go in the offensive areas and then you sign essentially a defensive midfielder, although he might be an auxiliary striker by the end of the season, but a defensive midfielder and a left back, I think you leave yourself vulnerable. And I know there was a lot of consternation about the left back last season because Zinchenko didn't really fill the role very well, and there were various other options. Timber didn't get a chance to play very often. Tomiyasu wasn't fit. Various players struggled in that position, but I think if you look at it, was it the essential bit that Arsenal needed to go and dump 40 plus million on? I'm not fully convinced. Obviously, we're all talking with hindsight and we were all happy when Calafiori came. But again, with the midfield position, they went for someone who's a bit more dual focused than Smith Rowe, is a bit more off the cuff. And yeah, just some of the summer planning, like you say, wasn't great. And it does go back to then. And then the goalkeeping situation was weird because we all knew Ramsdale was going to leave and we all knew that Arsenal would need a backup goalkeeper. So why wait until that said goalkeeper was cup-tied, meaning that David Raya is also struggling with muscle injuries at the minute. So yeah, there's a lot of questionable things that went on at Arsenal over the summer. And I think, like you mentioned before about the I think you called it executive health or boardroom health. I think that's definitely an interesting angle to be looking at going forward. But obviously there's things going on behind the scenes that we don't fully understand and we don't fully know. But Arteta was pushing hard for Calafiori and for Marino. So I think he has to shoulder a bit of the blame as well. It's not just those above him. And I think he felt that the forwards were good enough to gamble on for the rest of the season. And the gamble really hasn't paid off.
Just sort of widening that out, is the forward situation, because like the discussion, the debate, whatever you want to call it, about how Arsenal just need a number 9. They need this striker. They need the prolific striker. It's been done to death, and, you can all have your opinion on that. But generally speaking, I think there is a wider discussion to be had about Arsenal and what they invest in players in forward areas. And look, I get it to an extent. Building a squad from back to front to be solid and reliable and defensively strong, I get it. And we're in good health, touch wood, all the rest. Defensively, we've got, defensive options, we've got midfield options. But I think when you look at players who've left Arsenal right now, you talk about Eddie Nketiah, would people be going, Eddie Nketiah is the only striker we have available to us, that's not good enough? Absolutely they would. But at least we'd have Eddie Nketiah.
Yeah.
Similarly, since last summer, Arsenal have let Fowler and Balogun go for good reason, and they got some money in, and good luck with that decision. Mika Bierith, who went to Sturm Graz and is now at Monaco with Balogun, we got some money for that, so fair play. And if they thought he wasn't at the level, he wasn't at the level. Nketiah's gone, Smith Rowe is gone, Vieira's gone, Reece Nelson's gone. And the only players who've come in from an attacking perspective are Kai Havertz, who was signed as a midfielder, and Raheem Sterling, who I'm pretty sure Arsenal expected more from over the course of this season. But, if that's what you do you not run that massive risk of falling short, where you haven't invested properly in areas that can win you games and win you titles and win you trophies and make the difference in a game? Arsenal went into the season with one senior attacking midfield player. Like, nominally speaking, that's Martin Odegaard. We know Declan Rice can be an attacking midfielder. We know Ethan Nwaneri was coming through and getting ready to make a breakthrough. But to have one single attack-minded midfielder in your squad, that came into sharp focus anyway, didn't it? When Odegaard got injured earlier in the season, and we were doing this, that, and the other to try and cope with the absence of a player who ideally you would have some kind of natural replacement for.
Yeah, it has felt for large parts of the season that Arsenal have been sort of coping with the bad decisions they made in the summer. So you mentioned that Odegaard one. You mentioned we've already talking about the forward positions, and yeah, it's an issue. I think when it comes to the point about the amount spent on forwards versus the amount spent on defenders and midfielders. Listen, if Declan Rice and Gabriel had been lurking in the academy when Mikel Arteta took over, I don't think Arsenal would have spent as much as, I'm sure they would have spent more on forwards because Arsenal had Bukayo Saka, Emile Smith Rowe, Gabriel Martinelli already at the club. So I think that kind of distorts that argument ever so slightly. But with all that said, there definitely is an argument that they should have maybe thought about the creativity and forward thrust in the team, because I think we all looked at it at the start of the season. We thought there's not really enough. And I get why they made the gamble. Listen, Martin Odegaard has never had a long-term injury in his career, gets one this season. Kai Havertz never had a long-term injury in his career, gets one this season. Bukayo Saka never had a long-term injury in his career, gets one this season. That's unlucky. But I think you leave yourself vulnerable to luck when you play these players to such an extent that they are picking up hamstring injuries because you're playing them every minute that God sends. And I think if you look at what Liverpool have done, and the reason they're still able to press high in big games right at the end is because they've been able to share the minutes a bit more. And obviously an element of luck is involved in that, but I think also they've been pretty good at sort of resting players and sharing minutes round. They've had fortunate draws, and for example, the FA Cup, I know they lost to Plymouth, but that gave them the opportunity to change the whole team. Accrington Stanley in the round before could change the whole team, but they sort of they had a squad that was deep enough to cope with that, and they have lots of players who can play in multiple forward positions, and Arsenal don't have that, and I think that's why they're struggling, and they've been paying the price of that pretty much all season. And like you mentioned, when Odegaard was gone, they had to play a 4-4-2 with two defensive midfielders that didn't really work for long periods. Right now, God knows what they'll have to do. I think it'll be Trossard up front, Sterling on the left, Winner on the right, which could work for a game or two, but is it going to work across months, which it's realistically going to have to? I have my doubts, and yeah, it was a poor summer in retrospect, and they're really suffering for it now, and have been all season.
I know, questions about how much the players or how many minutes the players are asked to play I think is a very valid one. I think when you get three players who suffer hamstring injuries of that severity, Havertz is obviously out now, may require surgery, we don't know yet. Saka had to have surgery. Martinelli, when he got his, it was like at least 4 weeks, it could be 6 weeks. So that's like a, one in the middle, like a mild calf strain or hamstring strain is usually about 3 weeks. So maybe there's a question to be asked about how three players have suffered hamstring injuries of that severity. And people will say, well, look, Mo Salah plays all the minutes for Liverpool, which is true. Does Mo Salah have to do what Kai Havertz does in terms of the running and the intensity of the game? I mean, is there something about what Mikel Arteta asks of his players? I'm not saying that Arsenal minutes are more taxing than Liverpool minutes. They may well be. Somebody could do the maths or the stats on how far the players run and the intensity of the sprints. I don't have the information at that sort of granular level, but it does strike me that there is an intensity to the way we ask our forward players in particular to play that might well be part of what we're experiencing now, because not only are they asked to do a lot offensively, we ask them to do a hell of a lot defensively as well, be the first line of defense. How many times have you spoken about a moment in a game where the opposition threatened and all of a sudden it's Kai Havertz or Gabriel Martinelli or Bukayo Saka who have tracked 70, 80 yards to come back and make an important defensive intervention, which is brilliant, and I love it, and I love the commitment of those players in doing that, but let's not pretend that doesn't take something out of them.
Yeah, and when was the last time you can remember Mo Salah doing something like that? I can't in nearly 10 years that he's been in England. Yeah, he scores 25, 30 goals a season, so I don't think Liverpool fans particularly care. And it is interesting. I think I look at someone like Salah, and lots of people are making the comparison. So let's a bit of basic analysis, because like you say, we don't have the facts and figures, but game state is obviously a huge part. Arsenal's had a lot of games where they've not been able to go 2-3-0 up. They've been 1-0 or 0-0. So they're playing right until the last and really sort of going for it until the very last seconds of a game. And I think that takes it out of you. But also I watch Mo Salah, and he spends a lot of the game walking, and that's okay in Liverpool's system because they have players who can cover for him and they have players who can make amends. That said, players like Luis Diaz and Darwin Nunez run themselves into the ground, but they have sort of six forwards of a similar quality that they can afford to rotate. So 1 week Cody Gakpo plays, 1 week Luis Diaz plays, Nunez, Jota, Harvey Elliott plays up there sometimes. Curtis Jones has played up in the forward positions for Liverpool in the past. And with that level of rotation, it's not as big of a thing. Whereas with Arsenal, they haven't rotated the forward line as much. Havertz has played nearly every minute this season. Saka had played nearly every minute before he got injured. Martinelli and Trossard is sort of the only example of where you do have that rotation and it works for Arsenal. And to be honest, I think it's unlucky for Martinelli that he got that hamstring injury, because Arteta will probably say, listen, I did rotate him. It was one in, one out with him and Trossard. They shared the minutes and Martinelli still got a serious hamstring injury. So I think that's a thing to consider. Obviously, something we haven't mentioned is the ridiculous fixture list this season. There's been a game nearly every 3 days since August, and that's going to take its toll, particularly on Arsenal's players who were involved in the Euros until the end of the summer. So Saka was in the final with England, Mourinho was in the final with England, Rice was in the final with England, and all have struggled with injuries at times this season. So it takes a toll. But when it comes to forward positions, I think there is something interesting. I remember seeing a piece about how Arsenal aren't pressing as much as they had been in seasons gone by. Mm-hmm. That is a factor of how much they sort of, the minutes that have sort of got on the legs, and they're heavy leg players now, and that's a really important thing to consider. But yeah, it's an element of luck, I guess, but there's definitely factors that I think if Arsenal want to get better next season, because I can't fully write the season off because it's only 7 points and Arsenal are still in the Champions League, and who knows, could surprise us all. But it doesn't look like they're going to win the league this season. It doesn't look like they're going to win a major trophy this season. So when they review the season, they'll probably look back and say, we should have had more players. We could have done this. We could have done that. And Arteta's very big on constantly reviewing and looking back. And he did a presentation over the summer. I wrote about this when I was at Football London to all the staff, where he talks about upgrading the system. And he's very big into computers and IBM and sort of upgrading systems and constantly never settling, that kind of thing. So I'm sure Arsenal will look at that, but doesn't do anything for them now. And right now they're in the woods.
Yeah, we've got a couple of players who feel like old IBM computers at this moment in time as well. Should just point out that Marino got to the final with England, or against England, but with Spain. But I take your point fully, and how that has impacted part of this season. Getting to the Carabao Cup semi-finals, you got to take the cup seriously, but maybe that had an impact as well. The extended, elongated Champions League format. Maybe the lesson is, it's about how you build your squad and how you build a squad to compete across all 4 competitions. If that is what you want to do, or you prioritize and only take 1 or 2 of these competitions seriously. But I don't think you can act like that if you're, in inverted commas, a big club. The question is now, what do Arsenal do and how do Arsenal cope? Because I suppose the elephant in the room here, right, is that we are going to have a conversation, and assuming that everybody between now and the end of the season is going to stay fit feels particularly foolhardy, or at least wildly optimistic. Because if part of why we've ended up in this situation is overloading players with minutes, if that is what it is, we have no choice but to do the same for the rest of what remains for this season, simply by virtue of the fact that we don't have players available to rotate in the forward position. So it strikes me, Kaya, that what you said earlier about Sterling left, Trossard middle, Nwaneri right, I think that might be what we see this weekend. But I think maybe going forward, we're going to have to see some tactical variation from the manager, some repurposing of players perhaps in different positions. Because that is the only way to cope with the schedule. You can't pick that front 3 for 90 plus minutes in every game between now and the end of May. Just not possible. It's unlikely to happen anyway, because, there's going to be some physical impact on those players. You've got to protect those players as well. More than ever, you've got to be conscious of how many minutes are going into those legs. So there is going to need to be some measure of tactical variation or different kind of systems that he's going to put in place. I've seen people say, well, can Arsenal go to the free agent transfer market? And my feeling, even though I think anybody would be kind of useful, is no. I haven't seen anybody on there who would really be worth investing any time or minutes into.
You don't fancy bringing Lucas Perez back then, no?
I don't fancy bringing Lucas Perez back. Unfortunately not. Diego Costa, I don't think that's going to be the thing that gets us over the line. I think what we have is what we're going to have to deal with. So it is going to be a big challenge for Arteta. I guess, look, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that tomorrow in his press conference, he's going to talk about what a blow it is to lose Kai Havertz. But the message that he will try and send, I suppose, is that it's I don't want to say opportunity, but it's going to be a challenge. And it's a challenge that he, as a head coach, as a manager, from a tactical perspective, is going to have to embrace.
Yeah, knowing Mikel, when it comes to team news, he'll probably try and say Havertz is being assessed for the weekend, but I think we're all past that. Yeah, it's a big challenge. I think fans of Kieran Tierney, you're going to see a lot of him over the next few weeks, and the irony of relying on Kieran Tierney in the midst of an injury crisis is not lost on me, but I think he could play left wing. This Merino at centre forward thing is something that's been doing the rounds on social, and it kind of makes sense, I guess, as a guy who gets into the box, and maybe they'll look to do what Jude Bellingham did at Real Madrid last season, and it sort of worked. I don't know if... Listen, Marino's not Jude Bellingham, and Sterling is not Vinicius Junior, and Nwaneri's not Rodrigo, so it's a risk. But
not yet. Not
yet. But Arsenal are going to have to get creative, and maybe it'll be a chance for Nathan Butler or Odeji to get some minutes. Who knows? I have to say that I don't think he's necessarily considered as someone who's a realistic option in the first team right now, but desperate times call for desperate measures and all that, and maybe he can get a chance and impress. But yeah, you think of those and you look beyond that as creative options. And listen, could Ødegaard play up front? I don't think so. He's not really the false nine kind of midfielder. And then you're looking beyond that, and you're struggling for options in the forward line. Maybe they look to play one of the fullbacks on the wing, but the difficulty of having fullbacks who are essentially centre-backs is they're probably not very good on the wing. So, yeah, those creative options that Arsenal are going to have to come up with are difficult. But in fairness to them, they have done that already this season. I mentioned the 4-4-2 that Arsenal played earlier in the season, and listen, it was stodgy, it was functional, it wasn't the prettiest, but it worked for long periods. They went to Tottenham and got a good win. They went to Man City and got a good draw playing like that, and they got some good results of that 4-4-2. And maybe it could be something similar that Arteta pulls out the bag, and he's shown himself adaptable in the past, and I think he likes these challenges, but his options are so limited. And you're right, you can't rely on... I mean, Nwaneri, the last time Arsenal played him 2 games in a row in quick succession, he pulled up with a muscle injury, and that's fair enough because he's 17 and his body's not used to the rigours of serious first-team football. And someone sent me a picture of Pedri last night and sort of comparing it to Nwaneri and the number of minutes that Pedri played at 17 when he was at Barcelona. And it looks like Arsenal are going to be in a similar position with Nwaneri. And you look at the injury struggles that Pedri's had since, and we don't want that. And we don't want another Jack Wilshere situation. But desperate times call for desperate measures. And I think another thing we've all not considered is when Bukayo Saka comes back, Arsenal probably in an ideal world wouldn't want to rush him because it's a serious hamstring injury. And you look at Tottenham and how they've rushed back Mickey van de Ven and Romero, and they've aggregated the injuries again, and they've been out for even longer. And if Saka was out for even longer than he already is, then Arsenal's season would be in even bigger trouble than it already is. So, yeah, that creativity is going to be difficult to find. I have to be honest, looking at the squad now, I can't see too many options other than the ones I've mentioned. But listen, I'm not the Arsenal manager for a reason. I think we're all quite glad that I'm not the Arsenal manager. Yeah. So hopefully Mikel can pull something out of the bag. But yeah, it's a big, putting a lot of emphasis on the word hope.
Yes, I think we might see variations of a 4-5-1 or a 4-4-1-1. Could be Merino, could be even Rice. Playing behind Trossard. There are other pieces he can move around, but I'm fascinated to see, and I think as well, simply in order to make up the numbers now that Martinelli is out, now that Havertz is out, we are going to have to see somebody from the academy on the bench just to make those numbers. So whether it's Nathan Butler or Odeji, who I think James reported today that if the injuries hadn't happened, Arsenal were of a mind to release him in January, which probably tells you something about, how they view his readiness for first team football at Arsenal, which means, not really. You've got Charles Sego Jr., there's Ismail Kabia, Keon Edwards, maybe, it will be interesting to see which one of those players gets the nod to step up. The one that they feel in a push, in the desperate times, calling for desperate measures, is the one most likely to make an impact at first team level.
Just on that, I look at so Marcus Rashford is obviously going through a lot of trouble right now, but if you can think back to when he obviously made his debut against Arsenal in the Premier League and scored twice and basically killed our title hopes.
I remember.
We all remember that very fondly. Rashford wasn't actually sort of the first choice youngster to come off the rack after however many injuries that Man United had. It was Will Keane, and Rashford came in and took his chance. And footballing history is littered with players coming in and grabbing their chance. So we have to hope that something like that could happen, that Charles Sego Jr. finds something within him that makes him a first team asset. And same for Kabia, and same for Edwards, and same for Butler or Odeji, and fingers crossed. But yeah, like you mentioned there, the evidence has been limited that they can do that, but maybe they can prove us wrong.
Yeah, who knows? Will Keane now at Preston North End. So, a tale of two careers, or a tale of two opportunities. Who knows? Who knows? Who might step up? But we will find out. And obviously, Mikel Arteta will talk to the press tomorrow, and we'll get his thoughts on that. So, look, just to sort of round us out a little bit on this one, we're going to do a few statements. We have this format where our wonderful Discord members have given us some statements, and I'll put those statements to you. You either have to strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with those statements. And I did ask for as many as possible not to refer to Havertz and refer to injuries and those kinds of things. But obviously that is the thing that's first and foremost on people's minds. So there might be a few like that. Let's start with one that might just be a bit funny given what happened last night. Fletch says the title race is back on.
Agree. The optimist within me is like, yeah. I'll be honest, when Salah scored and it went 2-1, I was like, oh, for God's sake. Because Liverpool hadn't played well, and they've done that so many times this season where they've not played well, and they've managed to come away with a win. And I thought, God, if they do this again, then there's nothing. But the way it ended, the way that Slot was sent off and will be banned from the touchline for the next game. I know Curtis Jones isn't necessarily the biggest player for Liverpool, but he was sent off, and the psychological blow seemed to hit them. And the hope has to be that it carries on and snowballs and accumulates. But I agree that it's back on. If they'd lost, I would have strongly disagreed. If Liverpool had won, I think I would have strongly disagreed. But yeah, why not?
It's about us.
Only February.
Yeah, it's about us coping. It's about us being able to do what we do. I mean, that was a good result in the context of the title race. It just comes after a week in which we've lost two really important attacking players. I was watching this game last night, and I was sort of, first part of the second half, and Everton had their chances at the goal disallowed. And I was like, oh, Liverpool's fucking winner is going to be so scabby here. And then, it's a cross shot that falls to Salah with his right foot. He puts it unerringly inside the post. So I watched the rest of the second half, but it got to like 85 minutes. And I was like, fuck this. I'm going to bed. So I went to bed. I was reading my book and I saw a ping on my phone from someone. I was like, hang on, what? What's happened here? I went to check, and I missed not only the Everton equaliser, but all the mayhem and all the fallout and everything else. So I just feel like Liverpool continue to fuck me over this season. But there you go. What about this one from Guavalope? He says, Arsenal's transfer policy is too focused on trying to bring in very specific and therefore very expensive players.
I strongly agree, but I kind of strongly disagree with the tone of the question, which suggests that's a bad thing, maybe.
Okay.
So I think if you've got a manager like Mikel Arteta who has such a specific way of playing and has such specific demands, and all the players who have come into Arsenal talk about the specificity of what Arteta wants, I think getting players who don't fit those exact demands doesn't make an awful lot of sense. And we've seen that when Arteta doesn't trust a player, he does not use him in the slightest. So, I think that Arsenal probably have done the right thing in going for really specific players. I just think that they should have gone for other specific players. So they should have gone for specific forwards as well as specific defenders and midfielders and goalkeepers. Because, listen, I think you have to back the manager and enable him to play the kind of football he wants to play. And the Arsenal transfer strategy, for all its faults that we've spoken about, has done that. So
I mean, I think we are in a position where a big part of the frustration of what's happened with Havertz and everything else is because there's an expectation that we should be challenging for the title. We are still challenging for the title. It's sort of lost in the angst of everything, which I understand, by the way. But, we are still challenging for the title. We did challenge for the title last season. It was a better title challenge than the title challenge the season before. And I think once you reach a certain level as a team, it becomes more and more difficult to raise the level with signings, right? So when you're in the position we were in summer of 2021 or 22, we lost the first three games, but that was the summer we brought in Odegaard, Tomiyasu, Ramsdale, Lokonga, Nuno Tavares. There was one more as well who I'm forgetting, but
Odegaard.
Ben White. I said Odegaard. It was Ben White. It was Ben White. But I think, with all due respect to those players, and you know, I think when you're in a low period, if you've got good scouts or good transfer targets, it's easier to raise the level of your squad than it is when you've got all those guys in there and you need to go just a tiny, tiny bit further, you know? So I think it is more expensive to get those players when you're at this point, because the best players cost you a fucking shitload of money. And that's also just a consequence of being where we are, right?
Yeah. And just to add to that, going for someone who's available just because they're on a cut price deal is what ended up Arsenal with Raheem Sterling. So I think, you know, you have to go for specificity. Otherwise, you end up with signings that can be essentially unusable. So yeah, it's an important thing.
Mikel Arteta, do you hear me? Simon King says Mikel Arteta is pragmatic enough to stay in a title race and the Champions League playing turgid football.
Well, it's good to hear from Mikel in the Discord.
We've exposed his alter ego in there.
yeah. His burner account's in there. I agree with that. I think his tactics, to be honest, it's weird because he's actually got a really bad record in Europe, but I think his tactics are quite good for Europe, if that makes sense. Like, I think when it comes to doing well in individual games or across two ties, I think he's actually quite well suited with the way he sort of puts defence first a lot of the time. I think that's important, the way he focuses on oppositions. And I think Arsenal probably could, you know, go get through between now and Saka comes back with a lot of very boring 1-0 wins. And I think that'd be fine. And it'd be a George Graham style, but I think we'd all be fine with it as long as they keep winning and keep putting the pressure on. But yeah, I think Arteta has the tactical capabilities to do it. That question does sort of hinge on there being no further injuries and no further issues, and having players on the pitch who are capable of scoring goals. And there's not an awful lot of those right now. But yeah, I'd say I agree, not quite strongly, but yeah, softly agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word turgid is sort of, you know, might get some people's backs up, but I think what we'll probably see is Mikel Arteta lean into what is strong with what remains of his squad, right? So that's defensive, and it's midfield, and it is a bit of suffer ball, or it is making the opposition suffer. You know, can we realistically play the kind of football we all want Arsenal to play without Bukayo Saka, without Kai Havertz, without Gabriel Jesus, without Gabriel Martinelli at our disposal? No. I don't think we can. I think we have to acknowledge that. I think we have to find ways to score goals. Set piece FC. Nicholas Jover will be doing some extra work on the training ground this week. But I think that the pragmatic solution, if you want to call it that, is to lean in where we're strong and look to hurt the opposition where we can. And that makes sense to me. Where is the one I wanted to put to you next? King Thierry. Geez, they're all in the Discord. Miles Lewis-Skelly should be given the chance at left 8, with Calafiori playing left back for the rest of the season.
I see that, but then are you dropping Rice into the 6 and dropping Thomas Partey? Because I think Partey has played very well this season, and I think I personally quite like Rice in that 8 role. And what we want from that left 8 position, right, is someone who can get up the field and get into the box and get goals. And I know Rice hasn't always got the goals, but he certainly can get up and down the pitch. And Lewis-Skelly, I don't know. And I quite like him in that deeper role where he can sort of weave his way out of... He seems to invite the pressure and have that confidence. I think Declan Rice referred to it as like a Moussa Dembele style, sort of being able to just sort of roll his body away from opposition defenders and an opposition press. And I like Lewis-Skelly at the left-back position. I like the inverted fullback. I think it gives Arsenal a bit of control in the midfield and gives them protection on the counter-attack. And I think we all look at Lewis-Skelly not as necessarily a player who bombs up and down the flanks, which if you're going to play that left 8 position, you need to go up and down, up and down. And I would be open to seeing it, but I think sort of why move him from a position where he's doing really well? So sorry, in following the format, disagree is my response to that. I think keep him where he is. He's doing really well there.
I think as well, if we're talking about load on players and we're talking about, you know, managing the minutes and making sure we keep as many players fit between now and the end of the season as possible, a sort of job share, if that's the right way of putting it, between Calafiori and Lewis Skelly at left back makes quite a bit of sense to me, because they can both play that role the way Mikel Arteta wants it to be played. You don't want to overplay an 18-year-old. Calafiori's had some injury problems as it is. So if we do the old switcheroo with them from game to game, I've got no real issue with that, although I can see why people might want Lewis Skelly in at left aid. I would say that is probably a more viable option when everything else is available to you, rather than what we've got at this moment in time. So I would kind of disagree with that one. Critical T says, Trossard's best performances for Arsenal have been at false nine, and Kai Havertz's injury will be beneficial for Trossard as he will be able to return to his best position.
Disagree, because I think Trossard's best performances have been on the left wing. I think he's been good at times this season on the left wing. I think back to the Spurs game where I thought he was good. Man City, I thought was fantastic. I know he didn't score, but I thought he was a contender for man of the match that day.
He was great against Villa as well. I know he drew that game 2-2, but I thought he was really good that day.
Definitely. And I think his sort of giving the ball to him, allowing him to dribble, sort of twisting and turning thing, I think it works better on the wing than it does at number 9 and the false 9, sorry. And I think as a false 9, he kind of ends up on the wings a lot anyway, because he vacates that space and allows others to run into it. So having said that, I think when Trossard came into the team, when he signed for Arsenal, it was as a false 9 because Jesus was injured and Nketiah wasn't really doing it. And you think that's a couple of seasons ago, and it kept Arsenal's title charge going because it revived Martinelli and it allowed a bit of space for Saka to operate on the other side. So that positional interplay, if Sterling can, if Sterling can find himself with a little bit of form, the idea that Sterling can rotate into that central space, he did really well with that at Man City. That's kind of what he did when he was at his best. And he'd sometimes would play false 9 for Man City. He'd come in central, and Trossard and Sterling mix it up a bit on that side would be nice if it was maybe 3-4 years ago. But right now it's sort of what it is. And listen, I think Leandro Trossard he's one of my favourite players in the Arsenal squad because he's so good in any position you put him in. So I trust him as a false 9. I think he can do a job there. I trust him on the left. I think he can do a job there. And I even trust him sort of in midfield, although I don't think he's at his best there. So listen, if Trossard has to play up front, which he will do for the next few games, I've got no issues with it. And so, yeah, I'll go disagree rather than strongly disagree in terms of his best football. But sure. I think he can definitely play up front and do well for Arsenal.
Yeah, I would disagree as well in the sense that I don't think it's necessarily beneficial for Trossard that Havertz is out, because I think there have been times where Trossard through the middle has worked really well with Kai Havertz in tandem with him. I think some of his best performances in that central position have been with Havertz there. So I disagree with it on that sense, but I do think he is intelligent enough, he's smart enough, he's experienced enough to be the best option that we have at number 9 or false 9 or whatever you want to call it between now and the end of the season. Again, I wonder if at times we might see the idea of repurposing Mikel Merino as somebody who can play further forward, just to give you that sort of big guy, small guy dynamic, whether it's in a 4-4-1-1 or a 4-4-2, something more traditional, I don't quite know, but it wouldn't surprise me a huge amount to see at some point, whether it's Merino or even Declan Rice, as I said a bit earlier, at times operating close to Trossard in that position as a false 9. Okay, let's do one more and we'll get out of here and let you get out of here. You sort of mentioned him a bit earlier on. Hans Wertenheimer says Kieran Tierney will score a Premier League goal this season as a winger.
I'm trying to think how to answer this within the format. Yeah, fuck it. I'll go with agree. Why not? I think he'll play there. I think he'll have to come on at left wing at some point, and I think he'll probably have to make an impact there. And I don't necessarily think it would just be close out games. I think he may start a game at left wing, and that would be fun for all of us. And I still remember that goal against West Brom in the snow. I think it was on New Year's Day a few years ago in the COVID season, and he can do it. So yeah, let's hope for it. Maybe he'll score from a set piece as a winger. Maybe he'll play up front. Who knows? Yeah, God, what What a question to be seriously considering in 2025.
It is mad, but it is where we are. We are where we are. And
I know. It's a really good question as well. So yeah, I'll go with agree because I want it to be true.
Yes, that's why I'm going to go with strongly agree, because I think that there is just something about the romanticism and the madness and the unpredictability of football that feels like if we all, when Arsenal finished the transfer window without bringing anybody in, everybody said, well, we're going to pay for this. We all know it. Everybody knows we're going to, suffer because we didn't bring anybody in. I absolutely know that Kieran Tierney's Arsenal career has got something left in it. And if it's a goal from the left wing position, then I'm fucking all for it. And let's see, when it happens. And let's hope that when it happens, it's a goal that matters and a goal that counts.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Listen, Kaya, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you as always.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed to Kaya, and thank you as well to our Discord members for providing some of those statements. There were a lot of them. Many of them revolved around Kai Havertz and injuries and stuff like that. And I feel like, for the most part, we did as much as we could on that in the conversation that we had. So I didn't want to necessarily go over old ground again. We will, as I said, hear from Mikel Arteta tomorrow. He has a press conference at 9:30 on Friday morning. We'll get some idea perhaps of what he's thinking or how he's thinking or what way he is going to respond to this. I was going to call it a setback. I feel like it's a bit more than that, though. It's a bit of a fucking disaster to have Havertz and Martinelli out, Havertz in particular. So I'm really curious as to what he says in his press conference tomorrow, and I think we can probably read a bit more into what he's thinking when we see the team selection for the game against Leicester. It's an early kickoff on Saturday, 12:30. We will, of course, look ahead to that game and talk about what Arteta talks about in his press conference in a bit more detail over on Patreon. So if you'd like to get involved with that, you get instant access at patreon.com/Arseblog. It is just $6 a month. And as well as getting extra bonus content, it helps support everything that we do on Arseblog. All the coverage we provide of the team, of the club, from top to bottom, from men to women to reserves and youth. It's patreon.com/Arseblog. For now, though, I'm going to leave it there. Keep your hamstrings in good stead, folks. Do those stretches. They're very important. Otherwise, you could find yourself out until next season, and nobody wants that. Thank you as always for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. We will, of course, catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com in a different universe from the one we actually exist in. Mikel Arteta's got some thinking to do this weekend ahead of our game against Leicester. Which of the 12 informed strikers is he going to pick? Does it really matter anyway? Because we already have a 17-point lead at the top of the table after Mo Salah got that ACL injury at the start of the season. And Manchester City, well, we all know they were relegated after the 115 charges came in. They were guilty on all of them, plus another 17 we didn't know about, and they've been relegated to the Isle of Man. It's worth stopping to think about how good things are, imagine there's probably a universe in which things aren't this good for Arsenal. Wouldn't want to live there, let me tell you. Anyway, a bit later on in the show, we will be talking to Matthew Flamini. Having brought about world peace, he has now discovered a cure for Rio Ferdinand. A day we thought would never come, but what a blessing it is to be alive in these incredible times.